For a few people, they don't know that this is even possible, so how can you do that? However, it's the easiest way to take stereo pictures, and the basic technique is exactly as stated. Shoot, sit, and shoot again. You take one picture, you shift the camera, you take another picture. That's it. If you've done this right, you've created a very nice stereo picture. However, what does that "if you do this right" means? That's what the entire workshop is about. I will give you some tips and ideas how to do it, why to do it, when to do it, and how to do it right. There are advantages in using a single camera to take stereo pictures. First, it's inexpensive because most of you most probably already own a regular 35mm camera, maybe an SLR. There is no issue of matching the optics because you use the same lens to take both pictures, so they're perfectly matched in terms of lens characteristics like the focal length. Then you're extremely flexible. You can put the two cameras side by side, or you can separate them 5 miles apart. You can produce a stereo pair. You're flexible in terms of your stereo base. You're flexible in terms of the focal length if you use a camera with interchangeable lenses. However, there are some disadvantages, or otherwise everybody will be using a single camera for stereo photography. The disadvantages are you must have stationary objects. If something moves between the right and left exposure, this will create a disturbance in the final picture, unless if it has been moved for a reason. And how many times do we have an opportunity to photograph something where nothing moves? Tabletops, buildings, but if you go out on the street, even in the scenic views, maybe the wind is blowing, the leaves are moving, so you're a little bit limited. And the second disadvantage, you're prone to errors because the cameras are free. If you're handhelding a camera, you take one picture, you shift, you take another picture, you can misalign it, and then you're in a little bit of a trouble to align your resulting stereo pairs. Now, with this basic picture in mind, we will explore now some of the things you can do and the things to worry about. I try to classify. You see, when I explore a subject, and I do this for my tutorials in the newsletter, I would like to know how many different types of single camera stereo do you have. And I came up with this list. I call the first one the slide bar, where you put your camera on a slide bar, you take the first exposure, you slide it, and you take the second exposure. Usually, the slide bar gives you like eye spacing or less, so-known hypo stereo kind of photography. The second group is the handheld normal stereo. You're trying to imitate what a stereo camera does. That means you move the camera by 65mm while you're holding it in your hands. The third group, perhaps the most popular, and one of the reasons a lot of people are doing single camera stereo, is to record a hyper stereo, which means you move the camera more than 65mm, usually several feet, and occasionally several miles. Finally, the last two groups. You are on a moving platform, like an aeroplane, a boat, even a car. Instead of shifting the camera, your platform is moving. You stay there, shoot two pictures in succession, and then you have a stereo pair. Or, a very unusual type there, your subject is moving. You're in the ground and the clouds are shifting in the sky. If you record two pictures of the clouds without you moving at all, you can have a hyper stereo picture of the clouds utilizing the movement of the subject. I will show you a few examples from each method, but first I would like to make sure you understand what I mean by stereo base. Stereo base is the separation of the two recording stations, if you want to call them like that. And depending on the size of the stereo base, You can have those three types of stereo photography, the normal, the hyper stereo, or the hypo stereo. And the 65 millimeter, the significance of that is the approximate spacing of the eyes. I will start with the slide bar, and for a year or two now, or a few years maybe, a friend of mine found this broken slide bar in a camera store. He showed it to me, and we both decided that this is perfect for stereo photography. Even though the makers of this bar, they think it's something to do with video or something, I don't remember, but this is very nice, compact, it fits in my pocket, my camera bag. I like it so much that I always carry stock for sale, and the ones that I had in this convention are already sold. Other people like it too, some don't like it, it's maybe too simple. The advantage of this is that the moving part slides on a plate. You don't have a racket pinion. The racket pinion will slow you down. If you can slide it back and forth very quickly, you can reduce the time lapse between your stereo pair. I took this picture for one of the Detroit assignments called Music. It's a tabletop, and slide bar and tabletops go hand by hand. And I want to capture some of the reflections here. Let's see another example. Oh, my famous color dice. Again, inspired by a Detroit assignment called Patterns. I want to create a pattern, and I thought, the dice would give me a good subject. I forget why I even took this one, but when I looked at it at the end, I saw a pleasing stereo pair, even though people have complained that I didn't darken. They can see this distraction here, they don't like it.
How far apart were these?
I will talk about it in a while.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I have to admit something, that even though I kind of lecture people and tell them what to do, I never, or very rarely myself, make any measurements.
Yes.
Now, I know this is kind of embarrassing to admit, but I almost never do any measurements. I just intuitively sit the camera. I don't even bracket the seat. That's highly recommended if you don't know what you're doing. And that's a source of a lot of anxiety for a beginner. I will give you some rules of thumb, but if you ask me how much they use in this picture, I'll say I don't know. And the reason I'm showing this one is your subject doesn't have to have a lot of depth. Here you have a keychain from Cleveland. It's kind of an anaglyph. Actually, this is how the word anaglyph came from, to describe this situation here. My subject is very flat, so I shifted quite a bit, as much as I could, so I will still be able to mount it in a realist format mount. This was my only objective here. This one, I would like to make this point. Again, a Detroit assignment called Music. This is my own figure in the left hand, and with the right hand, I fire the shutter, I shift the slide bar, I take the second picture, and amazingly, I managed not to move my left hand. So when I say stationary objects, they don't have to be dead. They can be alive, but just make sure they don't move. And by the way, that reminds me, I've seen a terrific portrait of a sailor with a pipe taken with a stereo realist, where the camera was seated on a slide bar to reduce the spacing, because at 70 millimeters you cannot take a portrait. So the guy had all this time to sit the stereo realist and take a picture, and the guy was totally still. Of course, he was a model, so these people are trained to stay still in these photographic situations. And tabletop is a matter of imagination. I found this at the local dollar store, so I thought it would make an interesting subject to explore in 3D. Notice the mounting. I mean, there's a lot of factors that will give you a good picture. It's just right, the nose right by the stereo window, a little bit forward. And just a plain yellow piece of paper from an office supply store in the background. I mentioned there are three types of photography, normal stereo, hypo, and hyper, and with the slide bar, usually you're in the hypo area. There isn't. Most people think of a hypo stereo as all the pictures I showed you before, tabletops, close-up of flowers, little insects. Not very many people have investigated the area like 1 inch instead of 2.5, or a few millimeters in between, 1.5 inch instead of 2.5. This is what I did here just to prove this point. I asked people to estimate the size of the opening here, and most people say it's about 8 feet or something. Well, it turns out it's more like 2 or 3 feet, and if two people meet here, they have to squeeze in the walls to pass each other. But because I used a smaller stereo base, maybe, I don't even remember, unfortunately, I had a slide bar, and I made a little error. You see over here is my shadow. So it's a little bit of a disturbance, but I masked it out. A slide bar, and my tripod was at 3 feet. You see, people are, first you think that I'm standing up and this is at eye height, that this is mistaken. No, that's not true. It was down at 3 feet, and it's very narrow, and the combination of those two factors fools your brain to believe that the picture that I showed you before is a normal stereo, is really a hypo stereo, and the space has been expanded. I move now to the normal stereo photography with a single camera handheld. I've mounted this in a very wide mount, 31.5 millimeters, and my screen is set for 7 sprockets, so it spills out a little bit. This, when you look at this, it looks like a normal stereo picture, right? You don't think of this as a single camera stereo. I was in Greece and I had my stereo camera with me, but my stereo camera has 35 millimeter lenses, and for my point of view to capture the entire building, I had to use 28. So I always carry a single camera for these situations. And I carry 2 lenses, 28 millimeter lens and 50 millimeter macro lens. And of course a slide bar and a little compact tripod I'll show you later. So there I was, I put the 28 millimeter lens, and I took this picture that resembles a normal stereo picture. How do you do that? There are various techniques. You can shift the weight of your body from right to left. If you don't practice, most probably you will shift too much. This is the most common error. However, there is a nice advice. If you just take the camera from your left eye and you put it to your right eye, this kind of shift will give you exactly the stereo base of your eyes. So you have a perfect, normal stereo picture. If you look at it in the viewer, you will notice these lips have moved a little bit. But in projection, it's hard to notice some of these details, so you don't really see it. I'll show you now a contrast between a regular stereo and a hyper stereo. After the NSA convention last year, we went for a little tour in Arizona. We stopped at this location here. This is the Montezuma Castle. This is a normal stereo. From the way I was sitting, I had these branch leaves in front of me. The most reasonable thing to do is to frame something in the foreground, and here's your main point of interest. Now, if you only want to concentrate here, there won't be any depth. You see, I'm too far away right now. If I just remove from these branches, it will be a very flat picture. That's where the situation calls for a hyper stereo, and that's what this is. You see the details. Maybe I've mounted the rotation, I don't know, maybe there's too much depth, especially for those in the front rows. Always, the errors are magnified. But you see the difference. Now you're thinking different. You don't want to have any distracting foreground. You're far away, your main subject. You shift more, and you end up with this kind of picture.
So how far apart did you shoot those?
How far apart? I told you not to ask me.
You just guessing.
See, when you do handheld,
But I mean, was it
unless if you are really determined and you have laser ways to estimate distances and measure your, you want to do the science, you can do the science, and most probably, you have great results. It will take a little bit longer. Personally, I'm just taking my chances, and most of the pictures come out fine, I think. Maybe not sometimes. Anyway, this building is next to the White House. It's called the Old Executive Building, and this is a hyper stereo. Even though I was aiming for a normal stereo, obviously I shifted too much. I want to point out the visual impression that you get. This looks like a playhouse. A hyper stereo has the effect of reducing everything in size. It doesn't look real, it looks like a play model of a house. That's the effect that you get in a hyper stereo. Let's move to the moving platform situation. When you're in an aeroplane, you really should always carry a single camera with you. You have the possibility of taking some magnificent hyper stereo clouds, not that this one is one, but this is just a typical example. Or, landscape if you're lucky. However, there's a number of factors that work against you. Your exact seat, you have to sit by the window. The wing of the plane should be out of the way. all the exhaust of the engines. The window sometimes is dirty. I'm finding a lot of factors, but if you're lucky, everything will work fine. Then you can take some nice pictures. Now, this was taken from the ground, from a car. I just saw this nice cloud formations. I aimed the camera out of the window. I took the pictures. Now, I have to tell you that my wife was driving the car, but I have to admit that occasionally I have tried to take pictures while I'm driving. It's a highly risky practice and don't recommend at all. So have somebody else drive and take your time. Try that. Actually, this is the first one I've taken of this type. Now, how far did the car go? How fast was it moving? I don't remember anything. If you look in a viewer, you see the clouds have shifted. So you have a little bit of disturbances here and there, but overall, and especially in projection, there are a lot of depth layers. It's an interesting effect. I saw this picture yesterday. In this case, I have the camera stationary and I shifted the flash, so the shadow has shifted. This is my object. It's perfectly flat. This is the shadow of the object. It comes out of the window. It has depth. So you don't really have to move the camera all the time. You can either move the subject, and I don't have a picture like that, or you can move the light source, and then you have the shadow three-dimensional. Now, here's the big question. How much to shift? Everybody that starts, there is a big anxiety about this factor. How much should I shift? Well, let's think, first of all, what can go wrong? There are two possibilities, too little or too much. You can either shift too little, where your picture is basically flat, you don't see any depth, or too much, where you have excessive depth and you cannot fuse it, you cannot project it. In between, and I want to stress this, in between those two extremes, there is a wide range of shifts that will produce acceptable results. I've been maintaining for quite a while that the optimum is more a matter of interpretation. However, I agree that there must be a rule of thumb. There must be a starting point. Otherwise, you're totally lost until you gain some intuition. So this rule of thumb has been around for a while. It's called the 1/30 rule. It says that the stereo base, D, should be the distance of the closest object divided by 30. Notice, not the main subject. Whatever is closest to the camera divided by 30 is a rule of thumb. You follow this rule, you will get good pictures in a wide variety of situations. Then there is the more complicated, in terms of calculation, rule that says you can aim for constant on-film deviation, and this on-film deviation is what gives you the sense of depth. If this is constant in the picture, you have a situation where you have the same depth range or the same, well, on-film deviation on the pictures. Now there is a third factor. There is the focal length of the camera and also the distance of the furthest object, also the distance of the closest object. There are references in the internet that will give you, the full calculations. You can plug in the factors. People have plotted graphs of these. There's a lot of help. I don't have it here with me, and personally, I haven't bothered too much. I think this 1/30 is a good starting rule. And really, if you have some critical applications, you can consider, or extreme situations of close-up, very different focal lengths, you can consider something more complicated. This is a situation of too little depth here. I'm at the top of Acropolis, which is a hill in the middle of Athens, and okay, even though I think I had twin cameras on a bar, the separation of the cameras was like 10-12 inches, but it wasn't enough because the nearest object was just too far away. It's almost flat. Now, with a single camera, I can do this, which I think is an improvement over the previous picture. Now you have depth from here to down there. How much did I really move? I don't know, but I bracketed a little bit. It's a better stereo picture in terms of stereo. There is again another tabletop which is identical pictures right and left. You might get a little bit of sense of a depth here, or it's more a matter of the stereo window. There's no depth here, it's identical right and left. And I use this as a demonstration to explain what stereo photography is all about. here's the one with the depth, and if you alternate right and left picture, you will see the first bar is shifted slightly with respect to the second here and there, and that's what causes the sense of depth. That's the on-film deviation that I'm pointing out. That's what gives you, so there has to be some deviation to see stereo. Now, David Lee, who's a photographer in this convention, maybe you attended some of his workshops. He has come up with a little approach with simple steps. It's somewhere in the internet. I have the complete reference in my tutorials. He said, he put the following rules down, the simplification. If you use a stereo, for people or close-up objects or moving objects, use a stereo camera. You cannot avoid that. You cannot go all your life using a single camera photographing everything. I mean, this is the limit. People, close-up objects, moving things, you need a stereo camera. Now, if the scene has infinity, you can use 1/3 of the nearest object, and this 1/3 is a factor that says you can adjust it for your own preference. Do a little bracketing. Use 1/20th, 1/30th, 1/50th. See what you generally like. Maybe you like more depth than others, maybe less, and this is your constant factor. So if the scene has infinity, use that. If the far point is distinctly closer than infinity, then you can increase the separation by 50%. And finally, if you use wide-angle lenses, you can double the shift, or if you use long lenses, you can cut this amount of shift into half. This set of rules will generally work very well for a variety of situations. Some other ideas. You can study the rate of change. When you're in an aeroplane, people always worry, well, should I wait for a while or should I just take 2 pictures one after the other? Look how fast the clouds change. You don't know how close the clouds are. If you see as the plane is moving, you see a constant movement, then they're really close and you have to take the pictures fast. If you're able to see the change, then you better take the picture. If you wait, you're waiting for too long because the eye is very sensitive and the amount of shift should be very small. The total amount should be like 1 to 1.5 millimeter on 35 millimeter film. So it's really a very small movement. Now, somebody came with the idea to mark your viewfinder so that you see the closest and the farthest objects, maybe they're aligned, maybe they're not, then you mark the viewfinder and as you move along, the distance between these two increases, and when it reaches a certain value, you've moved enough, you take the picture. In other words, using this method, you are trying to actually measure this deviation right on the viewfinder. I will leave it up to you to find the details on that. It's a very small movement that you are looking for and what kind of markings you have on the viewfinder, but consider this as one option. Finally, they always say bracket shifts. You're not sure in the plane, take 2 successive pictures and then wait a while, take another one. Take 3 pictures and then try all the combinations, see which one looks better. And my final advice, I've seen more pictures being destroyed by excessive deviation, and it's too much shift than too little shift. So I'll say try and be conservative, at least have at least one conservative pair, and it might end up being the most acceptable. When it comes to hyperstereos, you have to worry about a number of things. Composition is the first, and I pointed out this in the Montezuma Castle. You have to remove the foreground objects, especially if they don't add to the scene a lot. They will be distractions. So a good situation is from the top of the bridge, or from the top of the building, from a high-rise hill or something. This works well for hyperstereos because you avoid the foreground. The second big area is the camera alignment. When you take the first picture, especially because you handheld the camera, you're going to move, the second picture has to be aligned with the first. To do that, you have to mark a couple of features in the first picture, like right at the center of the viewfinder, you mark the location of an object. Then you look at the bottom of the viewfinder and you see the line there, the bottom line of the viewfinder, how is it aligned? So after you move, you bring the same feature on the viewfinder, but you still risk the possibility of a rotation. Then you have to look at your bottom line to make sure this is aligned with whatever you had before. It will take a little bit of practice, and most probably a lot of pics will be wasted, but you always have to try to align the pair as you record it. You could align it and mount it, but it's a hell of a job, and some errors, it's almost impossible to fix. Sometimes, really, you've messed up a lot. You can use reduce height mounts and things like that. There are possibilities, but life will be always easier if you take it aligned in the first place. The last group is, I mentioned cloud movement, basically any movement. You have to be aware of this moving, and usually people forget to look at the clouds, especially in hyperstereos or in scenics. What happens if the clouds are slowly drifting while you take a picture? Here's the question. Should you move? You see, you have the option to take the left first and the right second, or the right first and the left second. So should you move with the direction of the clouds or against the direction of the clouds? Here's what's happening. If you move with the direction of the clouds will be pushed back in your stereo pair. If you move against the cloud, they will be pulled forward. Which one is better? Can anybody answer that? Is it better to push the clouds back or to bring them forward?
Back.
Right. Okay, most likely back, but I'll say it depends. If the clouds, if it's something in front of the clouds, like a hill or a building, then definitely you need to put the clouds in the back because that's where they belong. However, in this case that I show here, where there is no interaction, or if the clouds are in front of the hills in real life, then you need to pull them forward towards you. What happens if you don't have a choice? And actually, I have exactly this situation happen to me, not here, but I want to point something in the Grand Canyon. Again, this is mounted in wider format, so it spills over. This is a hyperstereo of the Grand Canyon after the NSA convention. If you see the cloud, it's a little hard to see in projection, but they're coming towards me. That means they have been pulled forward. That means I was moving against the location of the clouds. I was unaware of that. They seem to be totally stationary. But it works here because they're above the general landscape. So it doesn't matter if they come closer. Actually, it might be even more effective than pulling them back. But here's the situation when I learned my lesson. I was coming back from a boat tour to Statue of Liberty in New York, and the boat was moving slowly towards the shore, and it was a great opportunity for me to take hyperstereo. I took a number of these pictures. I tried to mount them and look at the first one, and these clouds were like in front of the buildings, totally disturbing. I went crazy, one after the other. The clouds were in front of the buildings. Finally, I got despair. Well, the clouds remained stationary for a while, so they're where they belong. Maybe they moved a little bit, but they're behind the buildings, and that's the only acceptable stereo pair from the entire shooting from the boat. Now, if I knew that my boat was moving against the movement of the clouds, I could have turned my camera upside down. I cannot explain it now, and sometimes I wonder if I ever understand myself, but if you turn the camera upside down, this has the effect of reversing your motion. So as you are moving with the clouds, if you reverse it, will be going against the clouds. So if you don't know if the clouds are moving, then you might as well bracket and try some upside down, some up straight, and then for sure you get up some, end up with something good.
You mean turn it upside down for the second one, or for both?
No, during the entire shooting.
Okay.
Okay, this was about the hyperstereo. So how about the close-ups? Are there any tips that we should know about? There is one tip and one recommendation. The tip says the light source should remain fixed. So if you're using a flash with a camera on a slide bar, don't put the flash at the top of the camera because then it will be seated with the camera. I'll show you what happens if you don't do that. The second is the question, should you converge the lenses or should you maintain the camera lenses parallel? Let me answer those two. In this picture, on purpose, I put the flash on the camera and I shifted the camera. You see that the shadows here, they are shifted and they tend to jump in front. Of course, this conflicts with the notion that the shadows should be fixed in the wall back there, and they create a disturbance. Why this is happening? Because, see, when you move from right to left, your shadows move. They don't remain constant. And anything that has moved in a stereo pair, it jumps in a different depth level. you should not move the flash. And one way to remember is when you go outside, the sun is at the same spot. When you take a stereo pair right and left, the sun is not moved. It's always fixed. So the light source is fixed. The shadows should not move. Or you can utilize the movement of the shadows to take the picture I showed earlier when this is your main subject. That's what you want to do. You want to move the shadows. Converge or not converge? When people are introduced to this idea of shifting, they say, well, look, our eyes are converging in a close-up, so I should converge the lenses. It turns out that this is not correct. When you turn your eyes are turning, but the film behind them, which is your retina, is not turning. While you turn the camera, the film is also turning, so it's not an equivalent situation. The recommendation, the proper way to do it is to have the camera lenses parallel. However, I'll explain to you what happens when you do that and what's the advantage and disadvantage in either approach. Here's what's happening. Parallel shift, right picture, left picture. Here's the letter H, here's the letter H. There is a lot of unnecessary information here that needs to be cropped here and there. You take this pair to put the proper stereo window. This is a matter of mounting the picture. You have to, if you make prints, you have to crop the edges. If you make slides, you have to use a smaller mount and position it appropriately. That's what you get. No distortion, but image loss. This is what happens when you do parallel shift. Now, if you do convergence, and I have to admit I have exaggerated in this picture, the left picture, you get the so-called keystone distortion where your left side, we can even see it here, it's higher magnification on the right side. You get this effect. This side is stretched compared to this. So when you try to match those two, around the edges, you have deviations in the vertical direction, which is a big no in stereo. So in this case, you have no image loss, however, but you get distortion. Now it depends what you're trying to. Sometimes preserving the image size, because you cannot remount, you're shooting 3D video or cinematography, you cannot mask your film, and you want to preserve a stereo window, then you converge the cameras. And if the conversion is small, and I have some limits in my tutorial, then you don't have a problem really. The distortion is not a problem. But if you don't care about the image loss, then might as well keep them parallel. This is what you need to know. And the stereo window is automatically positioned at the point of convergence of the lenses. This is exact application of what I showed you earlier, the keyboard photograph. That was a full frame stereo pair. I mounted on a 5-sprocket mount. And that's the best I could do. A little bit, if I had shifted a little bit more, I wouldn't be able even to use this 5-sprocket mount. I would be forced to go to 4 sprockets. But everything fits nicely. There's a lot of depth because to make the point, I shifted quite a bit. Oops. Well, it falls out, but already, if you feel your eyes strain a little bit, and there's a little bit of misalignment that I will correct right now. Now, the center line should be really comfortable, this letter here, but as you start moving over here, if you take your glasses off, okay, without your glasses, look how the images are aligned. Over here, they're pretty well aligned. You see they start deviating towards the end. So you're fine here. You start getting a vertical misalignment here and there. That's the result with keystone distortion. If you had masked your image down, there wouldn't be any distortion, but if you're going to mask it down, might as well take it to parallel lenses. There is one exception. There is one exception where the keystone distortion is not a problem. If you are using a long focal length lenses, or if you are using a microscope, like the scanning electron microscope, where the effective focal length is the working distance of the microscope times the magnification. So working distance 20 millimeters, magnification 10,000 times, gives a tremendous long equivalent focal length, essentially eliminates the so-called perspective in the picture. There is no perspective, there is no keystone distortion. So high magnification pictures are always taken by tilting the sample or tilting the beam of the light, and you don't have any distortion. But in normal photography, and if you use wide-angle lenses, this distortion is worse. This is an interesting picture that I'm going to close now with 4 slides. each slide is making a point. This was made by Ted Labert in the 1970s. Look at it with your glasses on and tell me which one of the three figures is larger in size. It's the one on the right, right? There's no question. The one on the right is taller. Well, take your glasses out now. They have exactly the same size. I can assure you from here to there, you can go straight line there, straight line there. The sizes are the same. So why do you get this, when you view it on stereo, why do you get the impression that the one on the right is taller?
Because it appears to be farther away.
Because it appears farther away. Do you know how he has, there are three exposures involved here. 3 pixels superimposed. What's different from the left to the right? He changed the stereo base. Here the stereo base is smaller, here it's larger. So when you increase the stereo base, the subject appears to be coming closer to you and getting smaller in size. You can do these tricks with a single camera and you can produce effects where you make things look smaller and appear in different places. That slide really belonged to my trick and creative photography that I presented yesterday. But in this case it was done with a slide bar, so I decided to show it now. The effect of the stereo base. We have a gentleman in our stereo club that he decided to try the slide bar, so he presented this picture in one of our meetings. And when I saw it, I know he's using a slide bar, so nothing is moving, right? There's nothing here that can move. But something is happening here or over there. And I said, what is this? So the more I was looking at it, I was closing right and left eyes, all of a sudden it just came to me. The cookie is melting. He's using these very powerful 500-watt, bulbs, and there's so much heat generated that it's melting. So this taught me a lesson. You think that nothing is moving, but just make sure that really nothing is moving. He was a little bit disturbed when I pointed out. I thought this was a scientific curiosity, and he thought I was criticizing his picture, but always happening at the end. Well, I like this picture, and I want to tell you something. I took this one with a stereo camera. If you find yourself in a situation where you don't have a single camera, you can still do single. You only have your stereo camera. Well, you can take a hyper stereo. This is a hyper stereo. I'm standing behind a window in the O'Hare Airport. The plane is really far away from me. If I take a normal picture, it would be a nice picture, but with very little depth. So I supported my stereo camera on the handlebar right beneath the window, and that helped me to steady it, so I didn't need a tripod because I used a little bit of a longer exposure to get larger depth of field. How much did I save? Well, I don't know, but I guess I was lucky. And then I mount it so that right the nose here, it's coming right in front of the window. You can play a little bit. I think this gives the best effect. You can exaggerate, bring it a lot in front to the point that gets a little bit ridiculous. I think this is quite right. So that's the point here. A single stereo camera can be used to take hyper stereos. But if you're using a stereo realist with a small viewfinder, you have to be and then you don't have any space to reduce any errors. You have to be extra careful. I was using my RBT, so I was getting full frame stereo pair, so I could, I had an advantage in that respect. And the last point I would like to make, there are situations, and that's the end of my workshop, where a single camera would not do it. And here is one of, an extreme example, hyper stereo of fireworks. This was reproduced from a medium format stereo pair by Greg Erker, and I like it a lot. There's a lot of depth here, and that's the next step. After you master your single camera, perhaps you can consider doubling it with an identical camera or lens at least, and try them in different bars and different combinations for subjects that move. But if everything is pretty much stationary, a single camera will do it. That's it, and I turn the lights on. I just want to show you the camera that I use now. It turns out today you can buy fairly inexpensive. I have this Pentax ZXM, and now it has a macro lens. This has a built-in film advance, which is always an advantage because you don't have to take your eye off the viewfinder. If you don't have to, you might as well not do it, then you pay attention to the alignment. They make them extremely compact and lightweight, so there's really no excuse for not putting this in your camera bag together with your regular camera. And I like this small tripod that also fits in this camera bag right there in the pocket. And the leg, it's by no means a professional tripod. It's not very sturdy, but for traveling, when you want to travel lightweight, this was made in Germany in the 60s or 70s. It's pretty good. So, in addition to my stereo camera, I carry this Bogen slide bar, the single camera with two lenses, the 28, and I like the macro lens in situations where I have to take close-ups.
What was the name of that slide bar again?
This is made by Bogen.
Bogen?
And I'll give you the model number later.
Yeah, but it's the table, right?
Is that Logan still currently being manufactured?
Yes, and I stock it myself, and I sell it and for 10 back with an eBay, and you can buy it from there or buy directly from me. I sell it for $40 plus shipping, and as I said, I have 4 or 5 of these. Now, there are other slide bars. This was my first one, and this can shift in both directions. Horizontal, there's a little bit of a movement in this direction, which is good for macro photography. However, try and put this in here, and you have to take something else out. This is missing the part that goes on the tripod. It's a small part. This fits right in the front, right over the tripod, or in the pocket, you know. Plus, at some point, I thought I would take portraits with this, even with amateur models like my children. They can stay still for a second or two, or you know, at least they can try. Then you can take a portrait with this. Well, if you try this, everything has to be unlocked. You know, it takes a while to go from one side to the other. This just slides across.
And that's self-contained, that one small one? That's all it is?
No, there's another piece that I'm missing somehow. The piece that goes in the tripod.
Right.
Probably
This will go in the tripod. This goes underneath the camera, and then
This slides really.
it slides really easily. And not only that, there's a little lock button. When you press, boom, it comes out. So you can take it in your hand and then put it back on the tripod. It doesn't have any graduation. It's really quite primitive because you can get slide bars. They're fancy slide bars that will show you know the exact distances, but I just marked these with different markings, but it doesn't matter because I don't measure anything anyway. So.
No, I don't either when I went for paper.
Just
I
recently,
use my
I was in
eyesight.
a place
I look
where
at
I
the building
had not brought my
back there and I
stereo
see how much
camera.
you gotta move to see the difference.
And I thought I might like to take some stereo pictures.
Yes.
And I bought 2 of the little disposable cameras. Unfortunately, they were not the square-ended ones. They had rounded ends. And I thought that I could come pretty close to getting the timing the same just by clicking both at once. And most of the time I did, but occasionally when I was taking pictures of something moving, I didn't get them quite exactly the same time. They were maybe a half-second different, or a quarter-second different. And a couple times I got some sort of strange effects where one person was seen who had moved in that quarter second was out of place in
Okay,
depth.
this is, you know,
Yeah.
just made a point that now, in these tutorials, I like to close the session with a quiz to summarize what we've learned. So the last one of my questions, because I spent 3 tutorials to discuss single camera stereo in this last season. So one of my quiz questions was, if something is moving while you're taking a single camera stereo pair, what's worse? If they move just a little bit or a lot? So everybody that answered said a lot. You know, if they move a lot, it's worse than moving just a little bit. What I had in mind was exactly what you said. If they move just a little bit and in the horizontal direction, because it doesn't matter in this direction, then all of a sudden they will jump out with flying objects in the picture. It's going to be more disturbing.
Or buried into it.
Of course, the size of the object also matters. The car here, and it's not even in the other picture, yeah, you will notice it, but at least it's not flying out there. So
leaves
So
out
after some
trees.
discussion, I was convinced that both, of course, can be a big problem. Depends how fast they're moving, how big they are, which direction they're moving, this way, up, down, all sorts of variables. But I was just trying to describe what you just said. This can be annoying. So
Yeah, the annoying ones are branches of trees that ruffle
it
slightly
would be
between.
yes.
You get a branch sticking out in space where it doesn't belong.
Yeah, so there's a lot. If you like to photograph buildings, and you're not in California during an earthquake, most, you have very interesting subjects that you can explore with a single camera. It's always a good alternative because the flexibility of the stereo base. The principle is extremely simple, but you just have to give it a little thought and get good results. Any other questions? Okay. Let's go back to the stereo.
Now that we have had the rice and flowers, the night is tired. Why, I can visualize such happy hours close by your side. The honeymoon in store is one that you'll adore. I'm gonna take you for a ride. I'll go home and pack my clothes. You go get your these and those, and away we'll go. On off we're gonna shuffle off to Buffalo. To Niagara in a sleeper, there's no honeymoon that's cheaper, and the train goes slow. On off we're gonna shuffle off to Buffalo. Someday the stork may pay a visit and leave a little souvenir, just a little cute. What is it? But we'll discuss that later, dear. For our little silver quarter, we can have the Pullman porter turn the lights down low. On off we're gonna shuffle off to Buffalo.